try to address any questions you might have. Also, if there are questions about the seminary, I can try to address those too. So, any questions? Yes?
Master, I appreciate your focus on guarding the truth and keeping error out of the truth. I see that as you've spoken about the biggest threat to the church is being brought out from within.
Yeah.
My question is, and I'd like your perspective as a seminary president, is there a formal oversight of seminaries and their staff? Can a teacher get into a seminary and start teaching error and not be subject to some of the formal actions of the church?
Yep.
Can you claim academic freedom and tenure and that kind of thing? I'm not talking about Greenville.
Yeah.
I'm very encouraged that it's under very faithful leadership, and I appreciate that.
No, it's a great question.
Perhaps, and that's probably limited to the Reformed
Right.
community, but what's your perspective?
Right, so let me repeat the question for the listeners online. The question was, we've talked a lot about the importance of the truth and the way in which error can come into the church and rot it out from within. That's the great danger that John warns us of. And so the question was, with respect to seminaries, are there any kinds of formal checks and balances, or oversight, really, on the doctrinal teaching of the seminary, and how does that work with respect to concepts like academic freedom or tenure and things like that? So does that reflect the question more or less? Okay, so I can speak about Greenville and how it is that we do things. So we have a couple measures in place even after a professor has arrived. So let's assume that the professor makes it through the candidating process. We will have at that point grilled him considerably on doctrinal issues. But the fact of the matter is people tend to change, and you have to be careful of that. So there are a couple things that we do. First of all, every year, all the professors and all the board members as well have to reaffirm their adherence to the Westminster Standards. If they have any scruples at all, they need to make those clear and write those out. And so we do that. We actually have a signing ceremony every year for each of the professors. They have to do it, and then so do the board members. We also, in addition to that, have our professors on 1-year contracts. Now that's maybe controversial in academic circles, but part of the reason we do that is because if there is any change, we make it clear that every year we're asking you these questions, and every year we're evaluating your teaching, and we make no commitments beyond that, really. Although of course we have a long tradition of having professors serve for a long time. But the other thing I would say is this: our board is intentionally made up of representatives from the denominations that we serve. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think in many respects this is, if not unique to Greenville, somewhat unusual. So in other words, we very much see ourselves as servants of the church. And so we have board members from the major denominations that we send men out into. And they hold our feet to the fire. We ask them to hold our feet to the fire. We have occasionally had denominations or presbyteries who have come to us and said, we want to spend some time at the school. We want to talk to all the faculty members and kind of press them on some of these key issues, and we've welcomed that. It doesn't always happen every year, but it has happened, and we're glad to do that. So it really is a situation in which the Board of Trustees, from the board down, the whole institution is made up of men who are committed to these things. In other words, we don't have board members who are just successful and able to support us financially, and so we kind of let them serve on them. But that's not how it works. We do have some men who are in business. It's not all ministers, but but we do have a number of ministers, and we intentionally only allow people to serve who are as committed as we are to a full subscription to the standards. So, there's no guarantee beyond that, but I can tell you in terms of the culture of the place that I'm confident that if I wanted to veer us off course, I couldn't do it. Of course, I don't want to, but if I did, I don't see how it would be possible, because the board would stop me, the professors would stop me. I mean, there's this real dedication to those things. Now, in terms of other places, I can't speak to every one of them and how they're governed. My understanding, and I'm willing to be corrected here, but my understanding of the major other Reformed seminaries is that they don't have that kind of representation from various denominations. They may have some ministers on their board. Most seminaries do have at least a few ministers on their board, but it's a little bit different. Ours is very intentionally positioned as the sort of majority of the board and a representative sample from different denominational bodies. So if at any point we were determined not to be serving the doctrinal interests, for instance, of the OPC, I mean, that would be a real problem. We would have at that point really gotten off track. So that's the best I can tell you. The other thing I would say is, because there's been such careful attention to that from the very beginning of Greenville, it makes the gatekeeping pretty robust. I mean, everybody knows that we stand and fall based on our commitment to this doctrine. And so when someone comes in, even on the front end, we're really careful about that. One other thing that occurs to me in terms of applicants and candidates, and I think this is unique to us as well, although, again, I don't want to, could be wrong, but all of our professors, and we've had this as a guideline, all of our professors have served in pastoral ministry for, I don't know if we've said the specific amount of time, but I think for all of them it's sort of at least 5 to 10 years. And I think that's really important, because then you're not just getting a freshly minted PhD who has all kinds of great ideas and innovations that he wants to introduce to the classroom. You have men who have served in the pulpit of these same denominations and have been judged and tested over and over again by their presbyteries and by their denominations, and have been found faithful in the midst of them. And it's only after that we'd consider putting a man in the classroom. So those are a few of the checks that we try to keep in place. Is that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it sounds like Greenville is fairly unique. And probably, I hear things about other seminaries, and we don't know what's true, but it is.
Well, I talked to other seminary presidents and leaders, and they don't. I can speak with great confidence about the men who are teaching at Greenville, even down to the adjunct faculty members. I mean, there's a robust process even for adjuncts. So, I pray that we continue to stay faithful. One seminary leader I talked to talked about a race to the bottom in seminary education, and he was talking not just about theology, but also just about standards in general. But I think by God's grace that we've tried to remain faithful to our original charter on that. Other questions? Yeah, Jeremy.
You talked earlier about the doctrine of Christ.
Yeah.
And guarding that doctrine in the church.
Mm-hmm.
You said that we compromise that in the church broadly at times. We compromise that by allowance of other things to be studied.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily in the preaching and ministry of the pulpit, but Bible studies.
Yeah.
I want to be careful not to put you on the spot too much,
Mm-hmm.
but do you have in mind either particular
Yeah.
that are sometimes espoused and allowed
Right.
within that secondary teaching.
Right. So the question is, as we've talked about preserving truth and guarding the truth, I made an application earlier this morning about the ways in which this creeps into the church and how we have to be on guard, not just about what's preached from the pulpit, although that's vitally important, but also about what's taught in smaller groups within the church, and really tried to say that elders and other church leaders need to be watchful and on guard in those ways. I have to confess, I could think of particular authors, but when I said it, I can tell you honestly, I really didn't have particular authors in mind. I did have particular kinds of ministries in mind. I will tell you this, this isn't putting me on the spot. I've had numerous pastors over the years, I can't remember any very recently, but certainly a number over the years who have said things like this to me. The truth is, I can't touch the women's Bible study. It's just that they do their own thing, and if we tried to get involved in that, it would just create a division in the church. And that's problematic on a number of levels. But one of the levels on which it's problematic is you say to yourself, okay, so let me get this straight. You've got a group of people under your care. Forget whether women or men. You've got a group of people under your care, and you know that some of the things that they are being instructed by are not in line with biblical teaching, and yet you're not going to intervene. But that's the kind of thing I've heard quite a lot, actually. And so that's what I had in mind. I didn't have particular names in mind, honestly, although I'm not afraid to talk about those, but I didn't. That wasn't what was going through my mind when I thought about it. I just think we need to be careful about these things. Now, I want to make another distinction too, which is, look, I read all kinds of books written by people who don't agree with the Scriptures and who contradict and go against them on all kinds of things. And so I don't think that reading a book that is not in line with Orthodox teaching is necessarily wrong. You have to be clear. You have to be thinking when you do that. But I'm talking about, these are essentially books that we've handed to people and said, here's your teacher. And that's where my mind was when I made that particular application. Yeah.
Follow-up question. Often and I think this is probably a claim more often seen in the OPC than other denominations. This church, this session is too controlling.
Right.
You can't change the light bulbs without asking the permission of the session.
Right.
So there's a balance, I understand, that can be struck, but when it comes to materials and studies, and in some churches that are much larger than this congregation, when you have small groups that meet and so forth,
Yep.
the oversight, the brass tacks of what does it mean to have oversight, can you emphasize what that means? Because often, when somebody comes and approaches the session and says, we'd like to study this book in this group, the concept of, well, you got to give me a little bit of time, I got to go read the book, I got to read through it, and I got to tell you whether the session approves of this book or not.
Yeah.
Well, that's just too controlling.
Right. So the question is that sometimes in our circles, there is a reputation among elders that they have too much control, they're too controlling, sort of micromanaging every aspect of church life. And so what do we do about that? How do we balance that? How should we think about that? Yeah, I think though, actually, you gave two good examples. You talked about, changing light bulbs, and then a book that gets used in a Bible study. And that's almost precisely the kind of line I would draw. Look, there are all kinds of things that happen in church life that it's actually probably healthy and important for elders not to be involved in, because the model that we see in Scripture for the diaconate as it's introduced to us in the book of Acts is actually to release, in that case, the apostles, but I think it would also be true of elders, to prayer and the ministry of the word. But I think when it comes to teaching, when it comes to the ministry of the word, that's where we have to get involved. That's where we are charged before God as under shepherds to do that kind of shepherding work. And so I think the kind of instruction that people receive in Bible studies, ministries of the church of any kind is exactly where we should be putting our time as elders within the church. Some people are going to think that that's too controlling, but I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, because the Lord's entrusted elders with the teaching ministry of the church. So that, that's sort of how it works, I think. So does that address your question? I mean, that's where I would draw the line. Look, there are all kinds of nuts and bolts things, and the light bulbs is maybe too mundane and superficial. Everybody knows that that's something that you'd want other people to think about. But there are all kinds of things that elders can get involved with, and sometimes they need to, and sometimes they don't. But one thing that's non-negotiable in my mind is the teaching that's being received in the church.
You answered the question, but what I was wanting to address has to do with often the membership of the church feels like, well, I have a great pastor, I have a great session.
Yeah.
But I go there because that's the church. But when I want discipleship,
Yeah.
I'm going to go elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to go to Alistair Begg's ministry.
Right.
I'm going to go to Ligonier Ministries.
Right.
And the concept of, well, you can read what you want to read.
Yeah.
But if you're asking for the advice of the session, whether this is good for you or not, this is part of the authority.
Right.
Of the elders.
Yes. So follow-up to the previous question was, about where people in the church would go for discipleship. Are they naturally gravitating towards the leaders whom God has placed in the church, or to other kinds of parachurch ministries and organizations? Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think what we need to inculcate in the church is that these are the people whom God has given for spiritual oversight and care. Now, does that mean you can't and shouldn't go to Ligonier and read all their stuff and listen to whatever you can? No, I actually think the elders would be the first to tell you, go for it. That's a great use of your time. And because there are so many helpful resources out there, and you can use your personal time to learn from them. But it kind of gets at the an inference that we could derive from 3 John and from 2 John, which is this: that remember John says, "Look, I have other things I want to write to you, but I need to do it in person." That personal ministry is vital for John, and the truth of the matter is that I enjoy listening to Alistair Begg, and I love Ligonier. Those are the two examples that were given. But Alistair Begg isn't coming to your hospital room, and he's not praying with you when you just got some difficult news about one of your children. I mean, that's just, he would be the first to say that. The same would be true of Ligonier or any of these things. So conferences have their place. These kinds of parachurch teaching ministries have their place. I'm grateful for them. I've learned a tremendous amount from them. But there's nothing. That's not the same as local church ministry, face-to-face ministry, that as the Bible lays it out. And I actually think one problem that we see in some of our churches, although I don't think this is as much of a problem in maybe the OPC, but in some of our churches, is that pastors are even starting to think of themselves in line with those parachurch models, and they want to be kind of the great speaker on the screen who then leaves right after, and you never see him again. But that's not New Testament ministry, local church ministry. So does that address it? Other questions, comments? Mhm.
Please tell us how your transition's been
Mhm.
to the presidency and how we can pray for you in that regard. And then I'm also curious if do you have a teaching load right now? Or is that
Right.
planning to
Yep.
take that up later, or are you already engaged in that?
Thank you for that question. So the question had to do with my own transition into this new role at the seminary and how that's going and how people can pray and thank you. And then my own teaching load. The transition's been great. The Lord has been amazingly gracious and kind to me and my family through it. There are any number of details that fell into place in remarkable and unexpected ways. And this really goes back, even before we moved, to the whole process of, going through interviews and things like that. I guess I can tell you a little bit about this. It was this particular position. I've appreciated and had deep affection for Greenville Seminary. I felt like I was on the same page with them doctrinally for a long time. But I'm not a graduate of the seminary. And I lived in Philadelphia, so I was a little ways away. So it was kind of I knew a lot of the guys at the seminary, but it was sort of overlapping, or, we weren't quite in the exact same circles all the time, just partly because of geography. And so when I was first approached about it, I was taken aback, and I really wasn't sure whether it would be the right fit, not because I had any concerns about the seminary. I really didn't. I had nothing but enthusiasm for it, but just because I just wasn't sure I was going to be the right person for this job. So it was actually, I'm grateful to the Lord for that in retrospect, because what that meant was I honestly went through the whole process feeling like I was sort of playing with house money. It wasn't my dream job. I never thought this was going to happen. So I just could be completely as transparent as possible. I hope I would always be that way, but I really felt this great freedom. Like I don't have to try to be something I'm not or someone I'm not. And I think for the board it was similar. And yet, at every step, it was really amazing. I've never experienced anything quite like it. Just at each step, there was just this deep compatibility. We were just so clearly on the same page. Dr. Pipa, I think, saw that really early on. He before the process had even moved forward very much, he was incredibly supportive and encouraging in sometimes very vocal ways. And so that meant a lot to me as well. So that just continued. The whole transition process just continued in that way at each step and at each stage. And so that has been amazing. It's been challenging, to make a move like that in the midst of all this COVID stuff. There were challenges for sure, but there was never a point at which I really had any doubt or question about where the Lord was in all this. So it's really astonishing to me. It was just a remarkable experience. It has been a remarkable experience, and everyone's been very welcoming, and we've all gotten along, and Dr. Pipa and I get along well and work together well, and so all that has been good. But I would say this: in the midst of all of that pretty much unqualified good stuff. It's difficult to leave friends, but it was so clear to me what we were doing. But in the midst of that unqualified good things, I do continue to really go before the Lord constantly for my daughters. I think by God's grace that they're doing well in the midst of this, but it's a tough time for them. It's a tough time to move, and I knew that, and we were aware of the fact that this is just a difficult age to ask them to make this kind of move. And so pray for my family. And I don't say that again at this point that I know of. I don't say it out of any great emergency, but just that's what I've been praying for quite a bit. I also would say I'm intertwined now with the seminary. So how the seminary does is that's my life, and so the requests I would also ask are maybe not just personal, but for the seminary. The things I mentioned earlier, those are deep burdens that I have, and they're deeply personal burdens that I have. So those are two areas, I guess, that I would cite. Question of teaching. Yes, I from the beginning said I want to be in the classroom to some degree. The board advised, and I think it was good advice, that I just teach one class a semester because of all the other things that I need to do. So right now I'm teaching a homiletics practicum, which has been it's been a lot of fun for me. I have 18 students in the class, so it's enabled me to get to know a lot of the guys and to hear them preach, and that's exciting to see how these men are growing in their preaching ability, and just to think about, even just this one class, 18, that's Lord willing, that's 18 congregations that I think are going to be well fed and well cared for. So I'm doing that in the fall, and then in the spring I'm teaching an Old Testament course, history and history and poetry. Old Testament history and poetry. So I plan to probably just do that one a semester for a while. I don't think that will increase because my days have been pretty full, even just with that one class. And so I think that's probably the right amount for now, although, you never know down the road. So those were all the questions, right? Thank you for that. Any other questions? Yes. All right, well, we'll circle back. Any other questions?
I think we're ready to be dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
As a follow-up, I think we realize that you are in the midst of a transition.
Yeah.
So, on behalf of the session and the congregation, thank you for coming and taking the time out of your schedule to be with us and to bring God's word to us.
Well, thank you. I mean, what a joy to be able to meet new friends, and it's just such a privilege too to be able to open God's word. So thank you for the opportunity.
Right. I think we're dismissed.
Thank you all.